Welcome to Humanity in Deep Space, Episode 22, The Rise of AI in Space. The rapid and unrelenting advances in AI and robotic technology is profoundly reshaping space exploration in ways just now coming into focus. This includes facets of human-machine interface, cost, spacecraft operations, navigation, life support, crew health, habitat design, and more. This panel brings together experts with diverse backgrounds, experience, and perspectives around this subject. The conversation will delve into the range of possible applications and implications of AI in space, and offer thoughts on what may be yet to come or imagined. Our guests today include Mike Canga, former NASA senior professional and now member of OSMED, the Organization for Space Medicine, Engineering, and Design. Gernot Groemer, Director of the Austrian Space Forum. Gernot manages large-scale human-robotic Mars analog missions and is an alumnus of the International Space University. Clint Kelly. Clint is a Blue Origin astronaut and retired engineer who led research and advanced technology projects in both government and industry. And Greg Schmidt, Executive Director of the nonprofit company Space for Good and former director of the NASA Solar System Virtual Institute. Our host and moderator is Chris Kimmel. Chris is the founder of Humanity in Deep Space and co-founder of the commercial space company Space Tango.
My name is Chris Kimmel, founder of Humanity in Deep Space, and want to welcome you to this webcast. I believe this is our 22nd or 23rd webcast, and it turns out this is one of the ones that has attracted some of the most interest. We have a great panel today to talk about a really intriguing topic, AI in space exploration, both from some of the systems approach and also human health and things like that. So we'll get into that. Let me start by thanking our sponsors, Space 629, Space for Good, the Kentucky Science Technology Corporation, National Stem Cell Foundation, Kentucky Humanities, Visit Lex, which is the local kind of visitor bureau, Human Space Solutions, Higher Orbit, Space Tango, 22 Solutions, and Baird, and also Interstellar Foundation. Thank everybody for joining us for this roundtable conversation. Before we jump in, I'd like to ask everybody to briefly introduce yourself, and we'll start with Clint.
So I'm Clint Kelly. I live in Glenview, Kentucky, retired. I had the good fortune to spend 8 years at DARPA in the 1980s at the dawn of AI, and participated in a lot of programs that have shown up in different systems today. I've also had the good fortune to be able to fly into space twice with Blue Origin. And on my last flight, this is what I saw. Doesn't show up too well, but that's the moon from 67 miles up with no atmosphere distorting it. The blue Earth below and the black of space. And 2 or 3 of us in the capsule said, "Why are we stopping here? Let's keep on going."
Thanks. Greg?
Yeah, my name is Greg Schmidt, and I'm Executive Director of Space for Good, which is a brand new nonprofit, only a few weeks old, actually, which started after I retired after a 41-year career with NASA. Doing a wide variety of AI adjacent things, particularly at the end. But my last position was director of solar system exploration research. We as an institute, and we did a lot of the research that is supporting Artemis, including the Artemis 2 mission, which is now scheduled for launch early next month. Extremely exciting. Our first return to the lunar vicinity since 1972. So I'm really excited to join this and discuss the enormous potential of AI in space, both what we're doing now and what the future holds.
Yeah, and I have to chime in that Space Tango, the company I co-founded, has the I believe the sole biomedical experiment on Artemis 2 going to the moon. So that's really something that we're very proud of too. Mike Kango.
Yes, I'm Mike Canga. I'm retired NASA after about a 36-year career, spanning shuttle and then human research program. I spent something north of 5 years working on advanced medical systems and studying the issues with modeling human systems, uh, not modeling, but figuring out how to provide individualized health services for long duration space missions. Currently, I'm active with a group called the Organization for Space Medicine, Engineering, and Design, and we are trying to synthesize the three disciplines into more of an interdisciplinary design approach for space medicine and providing space medicine on, again, long duration missions.
Gernot.
Good evening from Austria, not Australia, so Edelweiss, yes, no kangaroos. I'm an astrophysicist, I'm the director of the Austrian Space Forum, and I've been working on Mars analog missions throughout my entire career for 27 years now. So I've been leading 15 expeditions in Mars-like areas on Earth, which usually involved 250 people from 25 nations. So I would say our official working language in the organization is BE, broken English. And I'm working on human-robotic interaction, and that also means we're looking into AI inclusion in future exploration architectures that are going beyond Artemis. And so I had the privilege of getting a sneak preview of potential futures. Not all of those are working, but some of them are pretty exciting and promising.
Thank you. Yeah, and as you know, humanity in deep space, one of our key focuses is on kind of multidisciplinary, interconnected issues dealing with challenges and hard problems and opportunities in space. And so these panelists certainly represent that. Also, any of our viewers that want to ask a question, you can use the chat format on Zoom, and we will take a look and answer as many of those as we can as they go through. So feel free to ask anything you might have anytime you're ready. So just to start things off, I thought I might just begin at the beginning. Kind of what's your perspective on relative to space? Where are we right now with respect to AI? Not in the future, we'll get into that, but what's the state of the art right now? Who wants to start off?
I guess I could say a few words. Sorry, Gernot.
Go ahead, Greg.
Sure. So I come from NASA's Ames Research Center in the middle of Silicon Valley, and perhaps because of our location, we've been involved in AI for a very long time. Perhaps not as long as Clint, but definitely late in the 1980s in its infancy, and so we've done work in a wide variety of areas such as autonomy, enabling science at scale, mission design and engineering, and whatnot. The pace that everyone in the audience is seeing right now in AI is certainly also affecting the space sector, and there are some goals that are coming soon. Goal-driven autonomy, onboard science, decision making, et cetera, that I think are going to really change things. But the way I like to think about it, I was on an organizing committee for taking a look at planetary science 50 years from now and what that could be like. And the thing that I kept, this was several years ago, pre-ChatGPT, and what I kept emphasizing is, yes, the instruments will change, the rocket capabilities will change. Those are evolutionary. But what's revolutionary is the way I like to think about it. There is going to be an astronaut on board every single mission. That astronaut may not be human, but that there will be intelligence on every mission in the future that is going to be similar to, and in some cases exceeding, human capabilities.
Gernot, do you want to?
Absolutely. I was just chiming in this interaction. We're just barely scratching the surface here, and given the exponential growth we see in the developments, I would even dare to make a bold prediction as a starting point, as a provocative statement in a way. If you think about, when do we have AI as an Indian virtual crew member we trust, and they're not hallucinating, and we trust them with our lives? I mean, I think one of the major things we all across industries we're seeing right now is the level of trust we are daring to put into AI. And there's a generational aspect of this. Young people tend to be more trusting than us old white guys, so to say. But there's a famous quote from Arthur C. Clarke I would bring up in this. He said, every major development on Earth, every pyramid being built, every major moonshot or so, goes through three stages. First, it's impossible, what people say. Second stage, yeah, it might be possible, but it's too expensive to risk it, not worthwhile doing. And the third stage is, I always said it was a good idea. And so we're somewhere in between 2 and 3 right now, I would say. So if you make like a prediction and match this quote with a timeline or so, I can say like within the next 18 months or so, short term or so, I think most people in the space industry would say it's unusable. There's no use case, and it's a boys game or so, boys and toys or so.
Right.
Except a few things like starting using 30,000 star trackers for detecting space debris in their starting constellation. That is a typical AI topic, of course, in machine learning. In 2 to 5 years, we will see, there may be some special niches. You had a few analog missions on that topic. There are theoretical studies that identify some niche products or so. But then it will turn into operational sidekick projects that are, it can be used for certain niches. And beyond that, we're talking about less than a decade, it'll be an integral part, like a thermostat in a household. We all trust our thermostats. We don't see a Terminator red eye turning on when you're turning the heating. It'll be the same with AI. Less than a decade, I would say.
Okay. By the way, we just got a note from Titan Space Industries. Apparently, there's a number of people that have tuned in and appreciate this. You guys taking your time to talk about this. Mike, did you have something you wanted to add to this?
Not a lot. I will say that there is definitely a use case within the health services. We are used to having pretty closed cycle space medicine with ground-based doctors servicing missions and short comm times. Once we get a little bit farther away from Earth, there'll be delays, and when we get significantly farther away from Earth, we are definitely going to have long delays or even some very high latency, say for a Mars mission.
Okay.
Let's see, do I have everybody? Yes.
Yeah.
Where we might be at opposition and just not have very good communication. So we've always had in the back of our mind ways to use AI and very sophisticated modeling to organize the wealth of medical information that an untrained or partially trained crew member will have to have available in a actionable way in case of some kind of medical condition emergency. So we have a very big use case, but it comes back down to the trust. And the last couple of years have eroded that
Right.
in the general public's eye for sure.
Clint?
It's pretty clear as we go forward that space will become more of a commercial activity. Putting people in space or at least lots of people in space, is, I think, not going to be attractive to commercial concerns because of the cost penalties it's going to impose. So I think you're going to have more autonomous systems, more robotic systems. And the whole issue of verification then gets to be very, very important. As you move toward more autonomy and you put systems exhibiting more autonomy into spacecraft, how do you verify that they're going to do what you intend for them to do? Some of us have sort of played around with some AI systems and noted how sensitive they are to prompts, and also noticed how they can give the illusion of intelligence, but not exhibit some of the characteristics that we would associate with intelligent behavior. So I think verification is going to be a big issue, but I think economics is going to drive it.
Okay. I want to talk a little bit more specific here on something you guys have mentioned in terms of applications. First of all, when we talk about, I want to circle back to on this question of the interface between robots and AI and humans a little bit later. But, one of the big issues, it seems to me, that for human space flight, whether it's extended time on the moon, which is a little bit different because it's 3 days away, but certainly into deeper space or Mars, is the whole issue of, what role do you think AI might need to play and could play in helping to maintain the health and, in some cases, remedies of realistic health problems that arise in space? I mean, we're looking at a 6-month journey to Mars. The first, even initial trip, as you know, is probably nearly 3 years, 6 months there, basically a year and a quarter because of orbital alignment to come back in 6 months. So what does your looking at your crystal ball tell you about where this might not only be, but need to be?
Mhm. I think the medical perspective is the royal discipline of AI, because it really goes literally to the visceral effects of doing something that is medically health related, of course. I think we're going to see it much earlier in more engineering focused applications, like, can I add up all the power consumers in my spacecraft? Can I switch on my heater on that level? For the healthcare, I think it's going to be always a double check. You will never have the AI execute on the foreseeable future the full operation. Yeah, you will
Right.
have hands on the patient that are still human because somebody needs to hold the instruments. Yeah? I think what we're gonna see is the subtle changes that can be monitored by AI. I'm not talking about the broken bone that is a traumatic, instantaneous thing, but like, oh, I realize you have been drinking not very much water. Do you feel well or so? Because your water consumption has been changing. It's more like let's say an attentive nurse that is a very good observer looking into patterns and sees, well, certain patterns correlate with certain emerging illnesses or deficiencies. That is both for physical health, but probably even more important for mental health.
Okay.
To give you an example of what we've been doing in the Austrian Space Forum is, if you are talking with people where you have a little bit of attention, your voice pitch raises. Machine learning can detect it much earlier than humans can. At the same time, we see that the physical spacing between two people talking to each other is increased by like 2 or 3 centimeters only. That's very noticeable. So machines can notice that. So you realize, oh, these two persons have attention problem long before they realize that there is a problem. So you can start to counteract at the moment where they don't even know yet there is going to be a problem. That's where AI comes in.
Do you think there'll be, in addition to things on the body, you think that might lead to basically implanted sensors in the astronauts to monitor some of this stuff?
Yeah, couple of things.
Okay.
First, on the last question on implanted sensors. There are, I mean, terrestrial applications already, and they've been considered, or at least looked at, I should say, not considered, but looked at. When you get into implantables, you start getting into a host of ethics considerations and also consent with crews. I mean, there's a whole host of privacy and consent issues when it concerns medicine that probably isn't obvious to a casual observer, but very much the crew members need to be involved in decisions about how things will operate. A sense of autonomy and control is very important. So there are implantables currently in terrestrial applications, and certainly they could be very beneficially used in a spaceflight application, but it's going to come down to acceptability for the actual crew members. In the end, it is their consent that's going to matter.
Do you think that's
I would
true? I mean, on going to the moon is one thing, but on a deep space mission to Mars, I mean, do you think, it seems to me that, Greg, you have some thoughts on that?
Yeah, very definitely. First of all, I think medicine in general is going in this direction. I mean, I'm into, personal health monitoring, and the number of devices that I use now is I wouldn't have envisioned that, even as recently as say 10 years ago. And these aren't implantables
Right.
necessarily, right? And so I think that's one key point. But with regards to your question about Mars, we all recently saw that for the first time ever, a mission was ended prematurely. An ISS, International Space Station mission, was ended prematurely because of a health concern. Now, because of privacy issues that Mike was talking about, we don't know what that was, and that's okay. But on a Mars mission, that's not an option. You're going to be in transit, like you mentioned, Chris, for 10 months or more. You're going to be on the surface and in Mars orbit and exploring Phobos and Deimos for a number of months, and then you're going to be in transit on the way back. And so AI is going to help us a lot with that in terms of, number one, predictive kinds of analysis, the sorts of things that Gernot and Mike were speaking of, where it's going to be exquisitely sensitive at taking a look at which direction things are going in terms of an individual astronaut's health, but then also with regards to mission planning, and saying, okay, what are we going to need to bring? Because obviously not everyone is going to be a qualified surgeon, for instance, on who will be able to conduct an operation. And I think that by the time that we go to Mars, which is realistically nowhere closer than 10 to 15 years from now, we're going to be at a state of arguably AGI as far as AI goes, where AI could very much be an assistant in invasive procedures, and I think that that's going to be demonstrated on the Earth, before too much longer, in a handful of years, perhaps. So all those factors are really, really key for a Mars mission, where you're not going to be able to end a mission prematurely like we did ISS recently.
I'll kind of amplify some of that. There are a couple of places where you can say computer modeling and AI, and I kind of confound the two occasionally in my discussion, because it's whether you have a sophisticated enough model that's going to give you insights that would have been difficult to find, where that boundary ends and kind of an AI begins, it doesn't really matter for the purposes of this discussion, right? there's a question here about high dimensional data sets, and that is exactly the problem with medicine, is you have a lot of those. The vision was to build a digital twin astronaut for each of the astronauts on the crew so that you would actually be able to define their health parameters that might be unique to each astronaut, and then using AI or other computational methods, be able to have a reasonable assessment at predicting behaviors, whether it's behavioral behaviors or system/health behaviors, and also responses to input. And genetically, we're all different. So some people like aspirin, some people like Tylenol, some people don't respond to anything. So that's all part of where AI, digital models, digital astronauts, and precision health come together to help provide optimum health outcomes for each individual crew member. Going back to another potential case that I think Greg really alluded to is also mental and emotional health. It's a very confined environment, a very small population that gets direct interaction and high latency on communication. So is there any way to, as Gernot mentioned, identify stressors early and start to alleviate that, but also provide a more conducive environment for the mental health of the crew members, and potentially AI assistants will be able to be surrogate companions. I hate to use that word, but conversation partners, whatever you want to talk about.
No, I think that's important because people, it's on a extended mission, and of course the moon is included there. It's not enough for people to simply survive. They have to thrive. And so cognitive support and those kinds of issues, in addition to physical, is I think is really super mission critical, and one of the things that's overlooked. Clint, as the lead on the early work on driverless cars, you certainly are in a position to see where you were then and to look forward. What do you extrapolate from your experiences to looking forward on this topic where we might go? Because I think you said you were back in this 1984, so it's been a while.
It's been a while. I've stayed in touch with a lot of the people who are doing the current research and fielding systems. But I'd like to pose a question: why do we want to go to Mars? Or let me
That's a good question.
Let me put it this way: why do we think humans need to go to Mars? I can understand going to the moon because I can figure out, assuming that we find water in some form there in commercial quantities, an economic motivation for doing it. But I don't see an economic motivation for going to Mars, and I see it being extraordinarily expensive. And so I think, why not just build better robots and look for life on Mars using better robotic systems rather than have people.
Because it's terribly inefficient. Sorry.
Go ahead.
Do you think so?
Yeah, I've been part of this conversation for 30 years of my career.
Good.
So which is probably not as much as how many years as you have under the hood, but oh my God, I don't even know where to start. First of all, historically, commercial viability is not the sole reason that people have left their shores. The other one is that there are a few things you can only do or are very good do on Mars, like looking for a trace of life. That's not economically viable, but it's a reason to go. That's why we send an invasion from Earth every 2 years, roughly. I mean, if there are any Transformers fans, movie fans amongst us, remember that Mars is the only planet that's inhabited only by robots right now. The bottom line of this is, and we know this from literally thousands of crew hours from our analog missions, and there have been systematic studies on this. humans are a terrifically efficient exploration tool for doing geoscience, for instance, and life science, for many reasons. And this is not only because of time delay, because you say, well, let's put AI into the robot and he decides what to do. It's the very reason is that we don't have a very good understanding how a scientific brain works. What makes you think, oh, that's a funny rock. I should take a closer look. Define funny in an algorithm. That's not trivial to do. There's I love quotes, and this is another one I bring up with that from Steve Squires. He was the project scientist for Spirit and Opportunity. He said, I hope I'm quoting it right here. Please don't kill me, Steve. But he said, what what Opportunity has been doing within the first 2 years of its mission, and these are marvels of engineering. A trained geologist with the right instrumentation could have done within like 3-4 days or so. Huh? And so what I'm saying is, why don't we have robots on Earth that are installing TV antennas on the roofs of houses? Because it's easier to do with than a human. Yeah. So if you accept that the human is just like another subsystem within operational performance parameters, you have to have certain temperature and atmospheric regime, like you do for an engine as well. Maybe that approach helps you to understand that it's an incredibly versatile tool that can change tires of a broken wheel. Yeah. With the only difference, and that's one thing that is both the crippling and the most beautiful aspect of it, we humans don't come with a requirements document. And that's the only subsystem in space that doesn't come with a requirements document. So that's the reason why we have human-centered design, which means there are things waiting and luring around the corner, waiting to be happening, which we have not imagined because if we continue only to look with rovers. So the debate of whether sending humans or robots to Mars, I think we should transform this debate into send them both. They have
Yes.
their respective advantages.
I'd like to comment on that, a couple of things, if I could. I actually wrote an article many years ago on exactly what you just said, Gernot. It's humans versus robots. We need both was the title of the article. And so I completely agree. And before you mentioned Steve Squires, I was thinking of that exact quote. So I've talked with Steve about that, and so you're absolutely right. I think there's a dynamic tension there in terms of Clint's question, which I think is a really powerful question, particularly as AI advances. One aspect that we haven't touched on is something that I was one of the founders of astrobiology as a brand new scientific discipline back in the 1990s, and one of the things that we discussed back then, which hasn't been answered, is what would be the impact of humans on Mars if there is a biosphere on Mars? And we don't, and the evidence points to right now very clearly from Spirit and Opportunity that Mars was once covered in water.
Yeah.
And so it's highly unlikely that there's life on the surface, but it's also likely that there's water beneath the surface still. We don't know that yet. And so could there be life on Mars? And what would be the impact, when we bring not only ourselves, but more importantly, the microbes that travel with us, both on our skin, our gut, everywhere on our bodies. There are more microbes than there are cells in the human body. And so what happens when those escape? And I'm not saying if, it's when. And so what is going to be the interaction, and in my mind, three things could happen. Either nothing happens at all, if there is a Martian biosphere, nothing happens at all. Another is the Andromeda strain option, where where that is not a good thing for the humans that happen to be there. And the third would be, to me, an absolute tragedy, and that is somehow the escaped Earth organisms destroy the Martian biosphere. And that, to me, is colonialism at its absolute worst. And so I think this question isn't being addressed right now in a serious way, and I think this is one of the most important answers to your question, Clint.
Greg, let me ask you real quick. What's given the fact that, when I give talks, people always ask me, when do you think we'll be on Mars? And alluding back to what you said, I always answer, we're already on Mars. Robots are simply an extension of us as humans. Um, to your point, so we've got the machines up there. What possibility, despite decontamination, the best we can do, that already have happened to some level with the machines, the robots?
So there's a couple of good answers to that. It's a really good question. There has undoubtedly been some level of contamination. So planetary protection is the discipline where we try to not contaminate various worlds. And the worlds that we are exploring there's various categories. I don't remember the specifics of these, but the moon is one where we don't basically have to worry about it because we know that there's no biosphere on the moon. Mars, there could be, and then missions that have gone to Jupiter could have, for instance, impacted Europa, where there could be a biosphere or one of the other icy satellites, and similarly with mission with Cassini to Saturn. That's why it was deorbited, on purpose into Saturn, into the planet itself. And so NASA, I know, takes this very, very seriously. And so the decontamination, starting with the Viking missions in the 1970s, was there were very serious protocols that involved extensive decontamination prior to launch, and then making sure that the spacecraft that was going wasn't recontaminated by Earth organisms. It's not perfect, but it's a very serious concern by NASA and by treaty with other nations as well.
Mike,
With
you want to add
respect to
something to this?
Well,
with
I was
respect,
about to ask that question about the international community because we will not be the only ones sending things out.
right. The thing is that the European Space Agency is having the same protocols. They're all following the COSPA regulations of this planetary protection classes that within the next, I think, 50 years after an unplanned landing or unscheduled rapid disassembly, it's called at SpaceX, does not contaminate in a way that life detection methodologies are giving a false positive. Now, we have by far more than 10 tons of human hardware on Mars sitting around. The good news is it's quite hostile to biomarkers from Earth. The average lifespan of a DNA molecule under UV radiation is less than 15 minutes on Mars. And not even talking about the percolates and the aggressive chemistry and so on, or cosmic radiation or so. It's a different thing below the surface, of course. So I wouldn't be so worried about this hardware contaminating a pretty much sterile surface as we understand it. It's more of putting up a cell wall fragment in the very rock sample you investigate for life traces. So what I'm saying is that is not enough. It has to be cleaner than that. Yeah? The only way, and we've been working on this in my organization as well, is there will be contamination. There's no way, and that does not only apply to humans, it also applies to robotic systems, that there is no way to avoid the contamination. But what you can do is you can add an artificial contamination, saying little nano-sized plastic particles saying made in Taiwan. Yeah. And when you see those particles popping up in the rock samples you investigate for life trace, and you see there's a particle stating made in Taiwan, you're probably got to be careful with the interpretation. Yeah? And that's where AI can help us as well, because it's not that in my community that there is the one smoking gun evidence everybody's looking for. It's not that we're looking for a certain strand of DNA or so. We're talking about diminutive traces of biologically precipitated minerals that had to be collocated with a mineral that has not been heated up at more than 60 degrees Celsius, whatever. So it's a cluster of evidences which have to be interpreted for their different levels of trust we can put into those. And that's where AI can come in a lot and say, well, it makes sense in that context, or something is not right because those two informations, they're contradicting, they're not put working together very well. That's where AI can come in.
So, at the risk of getting us way off topic, I'm not sure whether we actually got to Clint's question as to why we go. Wait, I heard why we need to be super careful. But Clint, I guess I was wondering, are you thinking in the future history of humankind why we go, or in this kind of immediate future of it is technologically exceptionally difficult to go?
I was, I guess, looking for at least a hint of an economic motivation for doing it, because I think increasingly you will attract people and companies if they see how maybe they can make a little bit of money. And I can figure out, with the help of George Sowers at Colorado School of Mines, who was on this program some months ago, how we might be able to do very well on the moon. But I can't quite figure it out for Mars. And that's not a reason not to go, but it would certainly, if there were some scenarios that suggested you might be able to make some money on Mars, provides additional motivation for doing it. I mean, people ask me, why did you go into space? And, you know, it was for the experience. You read about it and you think, gee, I'd like to try that. And there's a strong motivation in us to go to places to explore. But Mars is be a very expensive trip. And so I'd like to have some kind of hint of an economic motivation to perhaps make it more interesting to go.
I've often said, I mean, I've often have reflected that I think the question, I think both sides, are very persuasive. The question I think, if you ask me, do I think humans will ever be on Mars? If we don't destroy ourselves, I would say the answer is yes. The question is when. And the other question I think it's not necessarily a trade-off between AI and robots and humans. I think that it is the question of humans should, yes, humans will go. The question is, when do they go, and when it's time for them ready to go? And I think that's more of a possibility. So I think one question is, it's not that, are they going to? So the question of, well, it's a lot, but in 5 years we're going to have 100,000 people on Mars. I mean, that's highly, highly, highly unlikely. So the question is, maybe do you think that's fair? Not when, but when would we be ready?
So how about if you put teams on Mars that consisted of a few humans and lots of robots? There's a substantial amount of evidence that humans and robots can work together, and sometimes in the industrial situations that I've looked at, actually do better than a team composed exclusively of humans. It was an interesting project done by David Bourne at Carnegie Mellon, about 10 years ago, where they welded the frame of a Humvee, and the human robot team did it for about a third the cost and substantially much less time. Now, admittedly, that's different from exploration. But if you had several robots that could work in concert with a human geologist and have enough intelligence, I use the word with a little I and in quotes, to say, this is something I haven't seen before, and then call up the human and say, am I looking at anything that's interesting? Big problem with robots is they're not curious. And it's not clear how you create curiosity.
Yeah, good point.
But there might be some way to train them so that they see something they haven't seen before. They might not be curious about it, but they have been programmed so that they would then say to a human, take a look at this. It's nothing I've seen before. So,
Well, sorry, I was just stumbled on this last night in a podcast I was watching where they were training Hubble data to look for astronomical anomalies, which is a very similar problem. I mean, you know what galaxies look like, you know what various clusters look like or other objects. So the question was looking for things that don't look like things we know about, and how to and I forget the team that did it, although I suspect Greg knows. But it was kind of an interesting thought process.
Right.
I'll throw it over to you, Greg.
Yeah. I don't remember that particular team, but one thing that I did want to comment on, with regards to Chris's question about when are we going to be ready, is this is something the institute that I was director of at NASA directly addressed, and that's using the moon as a stepping stone to Mars. And this is something that we've known for a long time. Finally, it's now gotten into the human exploration architecture for Mars, and it's become a moon to Mars architecture. And I could talk for an hour about this alone, but there's so many things, and so our current architecture, we're starting to look at things that I know you folks online are familiar with, such as in situ resource utilization. That's something that my institute was doing a lot, and partnering with organizations both domestically and internationally, so that when we go, we're doing as people did when they traveled across the U.S. to settle the West. They're not bringing all of their food and everything with them. They're using materials along the way, and that is going to dramatically change our strategy for moving forward to Mars. If we had to bring everything with us, all the consumables and all, that would place it much, much, much further in the future, rather than using the in situ resources. So, Mike, did you have a comment on that? I saw you.
Yeah, just one of my prior occupations was with the food system. And I mean, in situ comes up very often. The question becomes, if you take this to an intellectual extreme, what do you do when you have famine on Mars because of crop failure, right? And valid question. There are probably engineering designs in and out of the system, but I'm going to back up a little higher level to that, to a really more basic question about risk and risk acceptance within any of these missions. We have, and I know, Greg, you probably heard this, we have become pretty risk adverse within the space community. And that's probably a good conversation to have again, because the younger you are, the more risk acceptance you have to begin with. So having a risky occupation led by very old people may be a great idea. It may not be. But
we have a interesting question. Well, one question we won't get into is what somebody asked: are we finally over the HAL syndrome from the Space Odyssey? But the other question is kind of interesting. Somebody asked, talking about, it says, when penicillin was first discovered, nobody was really looking at molds. And so the question is it possible that there could be biological organisms we find on Mars that actually have some sort of medicinal purposes, uses for humans on Earth or elsewhere?
Yeah. That gets into a topic that when I was working astrobiology, nearly 30 years ago, now that we talked about a lot, and the core concept is panspermia. And so and this was an idea that was proposed over 100 years ago. Could one world have seeded another? And it was, for a long time, people thought it was kind of a crackpot idea until analyses were done on meteorites, both theoretical and experimental, showing that life, or at least biomolecules, could survive. So if you had rocks of sufficient size that had life within them, as happens in Antarctica, for instance, here on Earth, if you had an asteroid that came in, and sent those rocks into escape velocity from Earth, and then they eventually impacted Mars, you could potentially have a situation where a spore might survive. It's unlikely, but it's possible.
Yeah.
And so the core question there is what if life exists on Mars? Is it DNA and amino acid based
Yeah.
life? And we don't know the answer. There's a lot of people, looking into this. Are there other systems that would work as well as ours? And we simply don't know. If that's true, it's entirely possible that what you suggest, Chris, is true. That there could be things, that it would undoubtedly have happened a very, very long time ago. And so evolutionarily speaking, we could be talking about a tree that separated 3 billion years ago, perhaps. And so would anything useful come out of that? I don't know.
Yeah. Yeah.
You could take it one step further. How about the other way? If it first emerged on Mars and then came to Earth, so we are the Martians.
That's
That's
right.
right.
There's a lot of people I've known in the world that I would say that that's pretty much true.
Yeah. We have a bunch of comments in the question sections, and thanks for all this interaction. I think to getting back on track for an AI topic, I think all of us could go on for forever for those topics for sure. I'd love to spend a weekend in the hut somewhere in the mountains with you guys. What I see as a pattern there is we saw it in several questions, was the inclusion of AI literally in the body of the human, up to the point of implants, for instance, about the form factor. Where you put it, we know cochlear implants or so, which is already a form factor which is pretty big, given the size of the nerves you're touching it with. I think there's one thing we have to be clear in the space exploration field, is that the level of redundancy, reliability, quality required is still higher than in many other industries. So if you have a voice recognition that only works 95% in the world, it's okay for back home when you're choosing your next music track or so, but it's not acceptable for a critical situation. So first of all, I would state that you don't have to have AI everywhere. Think of Star Trek. This is a really good example. When you think of where do they use voice commands and where not. Like tea Earl Grey is a command you speak in your quarters when you drink your tea, right? And there, if it doesn't understand you can repeat. But if Worf fires a torpedo, he pushes a button. So same here, that for just like in the space shuttle areas, the flight control computers were giving the standards of the last years of its flight, and Mike knows a ton more about that, of course, than I do. They were comparably simple computer systems compared to the Pentiums back then that you use for non-critical scientific applications, for instance. And so you would have maybe some levels of trust where AI comes in with different invasiveness. And that also means if it's about consulting on the scientific interpretation of a preliminary data pilot analysis, well, yeah, why not just to be inspired by another opinion, so to say. But if it's a critical decision about which re-entry trajectory to take, you might want to be sure it does not hallucinate. So you have to differentiate it. And there's a last part, and then I'll shut up for a second, is that I think we always have this red light LED on the wall of a HAL 9000 that tells us, oh, I can't open the bed doors. Yeah. I would argue that by the time we have in the 10 years an AI agent as a crew member, it will be trained and grown just like a human crew member, just like a junior officer on a ship. You don't trust him a lot until he has proven himself. And the same is with AI. You go step by step until you have the feeling. It's very rare that it hallucinates, and maybe some patterns you realize as humans that it is hallucinating. I find it totally fascinating how fast after the pop-up of ChatGPT and co, people, teachers, for instance, developed instantaneously that instinct that the language that is produced by ChatGPT sounds not 100% human. It's not uncanny valley, but it's not truly human as well or so. So if you read an AI text, I think all of us smell it 100 meters against the wind. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
I wanted to mention a couple of things too, because you mentioned agents, so first of all, 2026 is going to be a really big year, according to pretty much everyone. I'm an addict for YouTube videos on AI. I watch several every night, and so you're going to see two things. 2026 is the rise of AI agents. It's just starting right now, but it's going to be really, really big at the end of this calendar year. If we were to have this conversation again in a year, I think that part of it would be amplified. Also, we're going in 2026 from large language models, LLMs, which we're all familiar with, like ChatGPT, and Gemini, Claude, et cetera, to large multimodal models. And where things like visuals, auditory, as well as language are mixed in together, and the models understand those natively. And I think that is going to have really big implications for space as well. And so I was talking with some friends, for instance. I have friends in the lunar industry about failures, some of the high profile failures that happened with recent commercial landers. Could those have been prevented if you had something with enough GPU capacity on the lander itself that would combine, instructions, a physics model of the lander and imagery, and understanding that natively. So that's all the first point. And the second point, and then I'll shut up, is I'm really excited about using AI as a tool for scientific discovery. And I'm sure all of you folks know, but perhaps people in the audience don't, that the 2024 Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to Demis Hassabis, who is the head of Google's DeepMind, and it's for the development of AlphaFold. And what that did is it figured out the structures of over 200 million proteins. And for those who might not realize the significance of this, a friend of mine got his PhD 40 years ago. He was one of the first to do this, figuring out the structure of an immunoglobulin using basic physics. And back then, as Demis has said, I've watched him say this, it used to be the province to do a single protein for a 5-year PhD project. And with AlphaFold, they did 200 million of these, which equates to 1 billion graduate student years of work. And the significance of this to human health cannot be overstated, because this is going to enable curing so many diseases. And in his recent talks, like at Davos, at the World Economic Forum just a couple of weeks ago, he talked about this, where they're looking at cancers and other things that have been untreatable. This applies just as much to space as well, and we're going to have tools to enable scientific investigations that we're not even thinking about yet.
So we've got just a minute or two left. Let me just ask for any final thoughts that you have at this point. Gernot, let you go
I
first.
think AI is a tool, and we should not develop a tool and then search for problems and use cases where you can use it. It should be always the other way around. You have a problem, a challenge, and maybe AI is the right tool, but it's not per se its own raison d'être. Yeah? It's a hammer, it's a steam engine, it's the next big thing after the internet. It's going to stay. We'll have to live with it, like it or not. So use it better.
Mike?
Yeah, I was looking at some of these questions and trying to think of something brilliant, and I'll go take it this way. In these questions, I see a lot of questions about the interface of AI with the human. And what I would suggest for the folks listening in is to recognize that if you're talking about human spaceflight and crewed missions, the design has to center around the human element. So AI, which is malleable, can be wrapped around the human, cognizant of their needs, desires, and autonomy, rather than trying to twist the crew member to the tools that are being built. And that's where I'll leave it.
Thanks. Clint?
I'd be inclined to focus on collaboration between an AI, probably as an agent and a human, based simply on the belief that that's going to improve productivity.
Okay. Greg, final thoughts?
Yeah. One final thought is that AI is how humanity shows up in places we can't be physically yet.
Okay. Listen, fascinating conversation. Thank you all so much for your time. We need to maybe think about a 2.0 for this, because I think there's I certainly have written down all sorts of questions that popped into my mind that we didn't get a chance to address, but it's really been very, very helpful. All of you are very busy. We certainly appreciate you taking time out of your schedules to take part in this webcast. Again, let me thank all of our sponsors who make Humanity in Deep Space possible, with not only your financial support, but your collaborative support as well. This will be on our YouTube channel in about a week. So if anybody would like to revisit the conversation, or perhaps wasn't able to see it, they can visit it there. And again, thank everybody for your time. And we will see you for the next webcast, which I think right now is going to be scheduled for April. And we'll be back with you on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you for joining us for Humanity in Deep Space. In his book, Pale Blue Dot, A Vision of the Human Future in Space, Carl Sagan wrote, "Your own life, or your band's, or even your species, may be owed to a restless few, drawn by a craving they can hardly articulate or understand, to undiscovered lands and new worlds." Our continued exploration of space is accompanied by profound questions, responsibilities, and obligations. What is our place and ultimate responsibility to the larger universe? And how do we maintain a sense of humanity as we leave the planet Earth? These questions and more are discussed in our videos, as well as other curated content at www.humanityindeepspace.com or on YouTube by joining Humanity in Deep Space. The music for this episode was written and performed by Danny Grandstaff and is available at dannygrandstaff.bandcamp.com.